great.
We got 25 minutes. We got to go. Hey, very Brooklyn. Hey.
Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Happy Wednesday, everyone. Hump day.
Excited to be here. Today is a fabulous Wednesday afternoon in Florida. That's where I am right now.
Still in Brooklyn, folks. I didn't abandon you guys. We out here.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. If you are new to our channel, we just want to say welcome and give you a little lay of the land so you know how we do things here. We're really excited because we are passionate about talking about the ugly come up of businesses. So you've heard about entrepreneurs, you heard about these amazing business people who started from nothing and have this massive success, right? But what happens in the middle? What happens during that ugly come up? We're here for that. We're unapologetic about talking about that. And so we come up with different topics. Sometimes they're from you, different questions from our audience, and sometimes we come up with them. And a lot of times our guests are the ones that give us the reason to ask certain questions. Mm-hmm. And then especially when we have guests like today, we have 25 minutes on the clock to answer the question. And after those 25 minutes, it's done. It's done. But don't you worry, you still have access to see what else has to be said about the topic in overtime. So on Overtime, we have our Patreon community members. They can join us on Overtime live to hear more about what our guest has to say in Overtime. If you want to watch later, you can always watch later, but only our community members on Patreon get access to the Overtime. And let me just tell you, the Overtime stuff gets juicy, so you don't want to miss it.
And guys, in addition to that, our Patreon community members also have an opportunity, depending on the level of member that you are, to actually be the ones that help us get not only guests on, but be the ones that get questions pushed forward to the show. So definitely make sure that you become a Patreon subscriber today. And for anyone that you are brand new, hit that like and subscribe button, guys. It helps the algorithms out so that YouTube can get this out to a lot more people. And with all that, let's get into today's question, Jay.
All right, here comes the drum roll.
Yo, the island vibes, folks. We're still out here. All right, so today's question:
is starting a podcast easy? Is it though? Because I don't know. You know how everybody says oh, I have an opinion. I have some thoughts. I'll just start a podcast. Why not? Right? Is it that easy? So we're really excited because it's not just going to be us today who answer this question. We have an amazing guest who's coming on with us. This individual has been doing podcasts for a very long time. So if there was anyone that we were going to get on, this is definitely the expert we want to have on today for our show. I mean, we're talking about 10 years, folks. 10 years. Yeah, this is a big deal. And so not only that, the #1 science podcast out there. Okay, so when I tell you we have an expert today, exactly. I am not joking. Not only that, I know her personally. She is just a ball of energy and light whenever I interact with her. And she's just really amazing. And so I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Kira Dineen.
Our next guest.
We are talking today about the future of genetic counseling, and I am joined by Amy Sturm and Aaron Gordon. So what's traditional anymore? Genetic counselors are being so many more. Today's webinar topic is going to be talking about digital tools for genetic counselors. As genetic counselors find the book that I think also made it into a movie, there's not a person on this planet that has not benefited from Henry Lack's Zelle. Hey. Well, thank you so much for all the kind words. My goodness. I was like, who are they bringing on? I'm like, oh, it's me.
Absolutely. We're so excited that you're here with us. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. We've got a good question to answer. I think just to answer it, the answer is no. So I think that's the end of the show here.
Show's over, guys.
Yep, show's over. We're about done. That's a wrap.
Well, okay. So tell us a little bit about your journey, right? So how old were you?
Let's go.
Yeah, how old were you when you started? What made you think hey, maybe I'll start a podcast? And so tell us a little bit about that. I would love for people to hear your story.
Yeah. Let's start with that, Janelle. So, I'm going to take it all the way back to 2008 for a moment. So for me, I was in 8th grade. So I'm going to, pop the bubble. I'm 27 now. So back in 2008, my family was going on a trip, taking, an airplane, which was novel to me at the time. And so I'm like, how am I going to entertain myself for this, all the way out to Sedona, from New York to Sedona, Arizona. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to type in Harry Potter into the Apple store and just see what comes up, right? And this thing called MuggleCast comes up. And I'm like, oh, what kind of nerdy thing is this? This is totally, I'm, a huge Harry Potter fan. And so I'm like, yes. And I know Janelle is too. Yeah. And so, I go to download it and I'm like thinking, oh, it's probably like a 5-minute thing, whatever. And it's like an hour and a half long. I'm like, who would ever listen to an hour and a half of people talking? I'm like, that sounds terribly boring. But I'm like, whatever, I'll download it. Probably won't even listen to it. Right. Then I'm on the plane. I get bored. I hit play. And Hedwig's thing. So they're using an electric guitar for this theme. And I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. And so I'm listening, and these people are just going on about Harry Potter and talking about theories they have and character development and just the wizarding world in general, right? And I'm like, this is so cool. I'm like, how old are these people? And I find out they're only 5 years older than me. And I'm like, hold on, maybe I can start doing this. Oh, wow. So I'm only in 8th grade at the time. So once I hit like 16, 17, that's when I was like, okay, I actually want to do this. I want to start a podcast. So my friends and I were enjoying the Hunger Games series at the time. I wanted to start a Harry Potter podcast, but that had been covered. Andrew Sims, Laura T, Micah, like they all covered it. Right. So I was like, well, let's start one about the Hunger Games, because there's not a lot of competition in that area. So we started a Hunger Games show. And so that's how I learned how to podcast. And about a year later, that's when I started DNA Today, which is the genetics podcast and my main show that I invest my time in. And now I've been doing that for 10 years. So it's really followed me through like high school, through college, through undergrad, where Janelle and I connected, grad school, where we connected at Sarah Lawrence College, into now when I'm full-time working in genetics and also full-time podcasting, because I just love both worlds. So that's what I pretty much do every day.
So wait. No, that really is. That process with the Hunger Games, because one of the questions I actually thought of myself today was, why podcasting and not YouTube or vlogging, if that's what we do is called?
That's an excellent question.
I thought about that. And then can you actually, what were the steps during that Hunger Game? Like, how does somebody start a podcast? I honestly always wondered that. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, this was back in 2011 when I started. So it's very different than what it looks like today. There's so many more tools that make it easier. But I mean, for me, I think before I answer how to start a podcast, because I know that's our main gig today here. The reason I went for podcasting is because, and it's still true today, there's way less competition in podcasting than there are blogs. And I wish I remember stats around this, but like there's so many blogs and articles out there compared to podcasts. Now, there's more podcasts today than there was 10 years ago, for sure. But the other aspect of podcasting is that it's such an intimate way to connect with someone. If I write something and someone reads it, they're like, cool, they read it, they move on. But if I'm talking to them and they're, say they're trying to get ready to sleep, they're doing their chores, they're going on their car drive, like I become a part of their life. Right. So especially when you're coming out with shows on a regular basis, like you guys, every Wednesday, this has become part of people's lives, where Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, people hop on. That's just what they do. Right. So I think part of that was just having that intimate, like I'm talking right into their ears. Right. Instead of like, oh, they're going to scan something and read it. I think people they can absorb it in so many different ways. Like I said, like I listen to podcasts doing so many different things. Like I listen to more podcasts than music probably. And it's just, to me, it's been like that since 2008, since I hit play on MuggleCast. I'm like, wow, podcasting is life for me. Like that. When people are like, I've never heard of a podcast, I'm like, what do you do when you drive, do chores, when you're walking, like literally anything on the subway? Like, what do you do with yourself? Like, so I think it's just, podcasting is such a unique form. And I think once people listen to you a few times, like I'm sure your listeners and viewers here, like they feel like they know you guys. Like stories come up, they're talking with their friends. They're like, oh, my friend, this podcaster I listen to, you're like awkwardly like, how do I bring this up? Like, oh, this Janelle person brought up this story the other day of like being on the subway, right? So it's like you become part of their lives. And it's so much more impactful than I think compared to a blog post.
So is it the voice, do you think, that gets that across as opposed to words? It's like, you made me think of just now. You guys familiar with Elvis Duran?
Yeah. In the morning
show.
So
I used to watch, So I used to watch, listen to Z100. And for the longest, I forget, one day somebody was like, oh yeah, I saw Elvis Duran. And I literally stopped and thought, I've listened to this man for over 2 years. I have absolutely no idea what he looks like. But I could pick his voice out.
Right?
It was like I never thought, and same to your point, I was like, oh yeah, this guy I listen to Elvis talks about, and I would say that in conversations, but I'm like, wait, what does he look like?
Yeah. Oh, I would Google like my favorite podcasters, and it would
Shocked.
blow my mind what they would look like. Because I create this image, or
In
they're
my
just like
head, I did the
some
same
ghostly
thing.
image. Like they're not even human. Like, I don't know, right? And then it's like you go and Google them and you're like, oh wow, like they're just like a normal
I
person,
did
right?
the same thing. Wow.
Or you think one thing and then like there's something else, or like, you know, whatever. You picture them a certain way and they're different. But yeah, I've said like for my like I've been listening, like Andrew Sims and I, we podcasted for an episode on his show. I was fangirling the whole time. It was very hard to be professional, but I've been listening to him since 2008, since I was 13.
Wow.
So that's like half my life I've been listening to him, as well as other people. I don't want to start listing everybody, but he's the one that inspired me to get into podcasting. So I probably know more about him than a lot of my friends. You know what I mean? Because I've listened to him for so many years, everywhere he's moved and everything. And it's like, I think people like knowing someone and trusting their opinion with things and saying, oh, like I listen to them. I know them. I think you have so much more credibility with an audience, and
this is so interesting.
Just like the way you develop a relationship with them, because it is a relationship. It's different. It's a one-sided relationship more so, unless you're a listener that, you know, is a Patreon, subscribes, and all the stuff you guys should be doing for this show. But it's a different type of relationship than I think any other kind of media can provide you.
That is. Yeah, that actually changes so much.
I left you speechless. Look at that. That's a lot to say for Janelle.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, like, I don't know. So for us, right, like we'll be transparent in like our own process, right? Like we thought like, man, we'd love to bring value to entrepreneurs, right? We'd love to help people just kind of like a better understanding of like what to do, what not to do, pitfalls to like make sure you circumvent, and like the mindset you need to have, right? We thought that would be interesting. That would be cool to like share that value. But you just said something that like I don't think I ever really considered, which is this Norman. I don't think I ever really considered that part, like what's happening right now, like the relationship.
It's like you're seeing it, a look into Winston's life and being a parent and everything, right? But yeah, I think there's so much to gain from podcasting as a listener, as a host. I think networking and relationships, like you guys often are talking to an entrepreneur group and a business focused group. I think networking and developing relationships is the key to like all business success and keeping those relationships going, right? So I'll use me and Janelle as an example. I would not be sitting on this podcast today if we hadn't kept up with each other in the 2 years since I graduated from the program she's involved with.
Right.
So because I kept this relationship going, I now have the opportunity to be on her show, and she invited me on, which I'm so grateful for, to have this opportunity. So I think it's like, podcasting is one of the ways where you can be developing all those relationships. And, you know, when people are listening and you're a podcast that's getting a good amount of downloads, like you think about, okay, if you were in an arena every week with that many thousands or hundreds of people that are listening to you, you'd be like, whoa, I have a lot of people that are following me and listening and involved with me, and care what I have to say. So I think you start thinking about it that way. When you see a download number, like think about, you know, Janelle and I, you know, and Winston, I think you're Brooklyn too. So, you know, we're New York people. So I think like, okay, would this fill Terminal 5? Would this fill, you know, right? The different places I go to see concerts. So I think the relationship building is such an interesting area of podcasting. But I'm skirting around our main question, which I feel like I should like address, because I've said like, oh, I'll get to that. Right. So I think starting a podcast, I'll edit my answer a little bit. Actually starting it, I would say, is pretty easy, but actually then launching a successful show, that's what's hard. You can sign up for, you know, an account. You know, there's plenty of different places. Anchor's one that's been pretty popular the last couple of years, where you can sign up for an account. You can record a podcast on your phone and then hit like submit, like pretty easy. Right. But I think when it comes to having a successful quality show, it takes a lot of work to put together. And it's something that I've integrated into my own life. So sometimes I don't realize how much work it is. And I do have an amazing team behind me that helps DNA Today be produced every Friday at 5 a.m. Eastern on our East Coast here. But it's a lot of work to launch it and then keep it going and keep up that energy, so you don't have what we call pod fade, where you kind of get like, oh, okay, another episode. Do I want to do this? And you kind of just fizzle away into the distance.
So it's interesting, right? So when Winston and I were thinking even of the question today, like we were like, well, isn't the real question like is starting a successful podcast like
there you
easy?
go.
And I was like, Yeah, but like I think that's the whole point, right? Like people think like, oh, I'll just start a podcast, but it's like that part is easy, and you just pointed it out very eloquently. It's like that part's easy, and then it's the longevity of it, the longevity, the making sure that it remains successful, and even this pod fade, is that what it's called?
Yeah, pod fade. Yeah, a newer term in podcasting. I've only heard about it for the past probably a year or so, but
but that's real. That's true too. I mean, especially like yourself, you've been doing this for 10 years, like you said, and like I can only imagine that there were a number of days where you may have been like, I
oh
don't know.
yeah,
Like, I don't know if
yeah.
I want to do this today.
And you're like pumping yourself up. Like I have to admit, even this morning, I'm trying not to be addicted to coffee, right? I love coffee. But I'm like, all right, today, Wednesday, I'm not going to drink coffee, whatever. But then I really got to hype myself up. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of tired. But then once you get into it, you're like, oh, this is awesome. You know, and you just feed off the energy of like the host and the guests you have on. And I think you just kind of like, you know, feel passionate and have that like, you know, jump you up and stuff. But yeah, I think it's definitely hard to, once you're launching that show, like I was recently involved in, I'm one of the producers of the patient engagement program. Sorry, the patient empowerment program. There's two programs I'm involved in. One is for genetic testing and one is a podcast. So the patient empowerment program, which is a nano rare disease podcast. So when I got on board, I'm one of the producers. So we launched it end of May. And I was like, okay, when we launch, I want us to have 3 episodes ready to go. Like that's on launch day. A week before launch day, we had a trailer come out. So like a 2-minute trailer saying, hey, this is what you're going to hear in the podcast. And here's some clips to give you a preview. So we had some clips of upcoming episodes. And we said, please rate and review us. And we did a big push for everyone in the organization. It's called the N. Lorem Foundation. So everybody that's related to their foundation and on their email marketing, like, you know, we reached out to people individually. Hey, can you rate and review us? And that I think really helped us have a successful, what I would call a successful launch with the podcast. And this just happened a couple months ago. And then keeping up with, hey, whatever schedule we set for ourselves, we are keeping up with that. So you guys do every Wednesday. For us, we're looking at releasing like twice a month for that podcast. So keeping up with that and having enough episodes recorded in advance so that guests are going to cancel on you. I'm sure it's happened to you guys. Things come up, life happens. Have enough episodes where you have a backlog. So if something does happen, it's fine. You have, you know, a few weeks, hopefully a couple months in advance so that you can fall back on that. And I think that's like some tips that I usually give for people that are starting a podcast. But I see we have a question. Should I go ahead and did you want to read that to me, Janelle?
Yeah,
Sure.
I could actually.
Or Winston, yeah.
I got you. So here, Kira, you mentioned liking podcasts because there's a level of intimacy you develop with your audience. Is there a way for you to know who your consistent listeners are? And then there's another one that says, like, is there a way for them to reach out and ask you questions? For example, here's the live chat. Like on here, we have a live chat.
Right. Yeah. Here, I'm assuming they were watching on YouTube. So we do not have a live show at the moment. Could change in the future. But we have, just so that people can email in at info@dnapodcast.com. People can also interact with us on social media and send us questions that way. So because we're an on-demand show that releases every week, that's the format that works best for us. But I would say in terms of knowing like who our consistent listeners are, it's the listeners that are reaching out to us. So it's the listeners, a lot of, you know, genetic counseling students or prospective genetic counseling students, people that want to pursue careers in the genetic space, reach out and say, hey, I'd love some advice, or like, hey, I want to apply to the school you went to. And like, how did you like that program? Can I do an informational interview and learn more about genetics? So I think those are the people that I actually add to a special email list. So I can reach out to them individually and say, hey, thank you so much for being such a valued listener and supporting us for all the years you have been. You know, we'd really appreciate if you could help us, let's say, get nominated in the podcast award. So that's one of our things right now that we're focused on, hopefully to defend the title for the 3rd time. For Best Science Medicine podcast. So we'll see what happens.
Actually, let's throw that up real quick. I have another question,
awesome,
but guys, Kira, like she just said, 5 years now, right? That you guys have been nominated.
Yeah, and then we've won the past
last
2 years.
There you go.
Yeah.
So they're going for that trifecta, the dynasty. Let's throw that up.
If you enjoy listening to DNA Today, please help us get nominated in the Podcast Awards. Head over to podcastawards.com and select DNA Today in the Science and Medicine category. We would love to celebrate our 10-year anniversary birthday of DNA Today this September by defending our title for the third time for Best Science and Medicine Podcast Award. So nominations are open now. They close July 31st, but don't wait. Please do it now. We are really excited to remind listeners we have been nominated for 5 years, including winning the past 2. So it would just be so amazing to win for a third time. And this is a People's Choice Podcast Award, which means it's all about the listeners' favorite podcast. So we need each and every one of you to go and nominate us. We're up against huge podcasts with huge production companies. So as a small independent podcast, we really rely on you, and tag us on social media when you do, and we'll give you a shout out on the show. Podcastawards.com, Science and Medicine category.
That is so awesome.
Thank you. I can't believe you just had that ready to go. Like, props to you. Oh my gosh.
Well, you definitely know that you're going to get our vote for sure. Guys, make sure that if you're watching, make sure you guys go out and vote. If you're on the replay, still go out and vote. Let's
grab
make
your
it happen. I think you
roommates,
have
your
until the end of
parents,
the
your
month,
partners,
right?
their phones.
Everybody. Win number 3 is on the way. I love it. Also, I had a question now. You're talking about, and Janelle alluded to it a little bit, how do you track success? Like, my mind immediately goes to monetary, because in my mind, if someone gets into this, and let's say there's a person who does go out, easily start it, register whatever they need to, what then are some of the financial benefits, or how do you go 10 years? What's the thing? Because if you're only now starting to be, I guess, recognized 5 years in, and then just winning awards in, like, is that the goal of the genre that you happen to be in, or the podcasting world as a whole? Is it like an ultimate belt? Like, you're like, yeah,
right.
Like,
To me, winning a podcast award was because, like, I still can't believe it happened. And it's
so that's across every genre. It's
international. Yeah.
Wow.
So we won in the Science and Medicine category.
Okay.
So that's like, our area. And basically one of the founders of podcasting that started podcasting, and get this, fall 2004, for reference, I was in 4th grade. So he started podcasting then. I was like learning how to read chapter books. And so I actually got to meet him recently at a podcast conference, and I sit down next to him and he's like, "Hey, I'm Todd." And I'm like, "Oh my God, yeah, I freaking know who you are. You're Todd Cochran. Like, this is crazy." And he was like, "Yeah, didn't you win a podcast award?" I was like, "Yes."
Wow.
But yeah, so I still can't believe that happened, because I grew up watching the podcast awards, being the little nerd I am. So to have even my name come out of his mouth was just crazy to me.
Wow.
And then to be able to meet him and take a picture with him and get advice from him was just like wild. So yeah, that was very cool. But I think the way to define success for podcasts is different for everybody. For some people, it might be to have a huge reach. Like, they want to have lots of, like, tens of thousands of downloads every episode, become really big, 100,000 downloads, whatever it is, right? They might just want to have a huge audience. Other people, like Winston's bringing up, is like, they might want to really monetize and have this be maybe their full-time gig, or, a second source of income that is quite substantial. Or maybe they're a stay-at-home parent, and so they're looking for, a little extra income, something like that. So I think that's one way to define success. I think another is just the quality of the episodes. I think that's always something you want to stand by. You don't just want to pump episodes out. I think even though we've switched to weekly episodes now, that's new in 2022 for us. Like, I still am really focused on having quality interviews. I don't want to sacrifice and have quantity over quality. So I think that's a big part. But there's so many different ways to define success. Some people might say, I just want a couple listeners that will become clients of mine, and they're going to end up paying so much for, like, my coaching fees or consulting fees or something. So it really depends. I think for me, it's kind of a blend of all those. I didn't start podcasting thinking that, oh, this is going to be a way to make money. For me, it was, this is a way to meet people in genetics and get my name out there so I can someday get into Sarah Lawrence College. Like, that was my goal in high school. Wow. I don't know, Janelle, if you even knew that, but like, no. I was in high school, and I said to my mom, she's a big supporter in my life. And I said, Mom, I want to go to Sarah Lawrence for college, or for grad school. And she's like, that's great, honey, but you got to go to college first. Like, I didn't want to go there for undergrad, because I was like, that's grad school. But Yeah, and she was like, "Well, you gotta get your degree first, and I'm gonna let you in." So yeah, for me, it was like, maybe if I have this podcast, maybe Sarah Lawrence will let me in. And Janelle was like, "Okay, come on in." No, there's a lot more behind the scenes, but yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say. P.S. I didn't even know that Kira like had a podcast when she
Right,
was
probably not until I was like a student there, and then you're like,
No,
"Oh,
because like other students were fangirling over you, and they were like, "Oh my god, that's Kira Dineen," and I was like, "My mentee?
right." Yeah. No, it was quite funny because yeah, that my first couple experiences with that was like really weird, like being at NSGC and people coming up, I'm like, "Oh, you work for DNA Today," and in my mind, I'm like, "I am DNA Today." Until recently, now we have a team, but like for 7 years, it was just me, like, in my bedroom at my parents' house, just being like, "Hey guys, like let's learn about CRISPR today,"
Right.
But
I can't
yeah.
wait to get into that in overtime. Okay, so we got one question here that I guess alludes a little bit to what you're talking about. Were there any challenges you faced when you first started your podcast, and how did you or do you maybe even stay motivated?
So many challenges. For me, I think starting, I had no idea what I was doing. So that was like number one. I was not like a techie kid at the time. I just thought this would be really cool to do. And so when I started, I didn't know what an RSS feed was. I didn't know how to make an
okay.
RSS feed. Nowadays, I think people like know what that is, but 11 years ago, I had no idea.
Unfamiliar, yeah.
So, and nowadays they have things like Anchor where it's like much easier just to like throw that in there, and create it. But back then, like you had to make a website and then create the blog post and somehow like create an RSS feed from the blog post and have each episode, go with the blog post and then submitting it to all the, back then it was iTunes, now it's Apple, but submitting it to all the players and then transferring my website at one point. So there was just a lot of things for me to learn on the tech side. And even just like being a host, like I cringe when people are like, "Yeah, I started listening to your podcast." I'm like, "Oh, like, do you remember an episode you listened to?" And they're like, "Yeah, episode 1." I'm like, "Why? Please, no." I was 16, 17. My voice is like this high. And I'm like, "Hey guys, it's cute." So it's like, I didn't know what I was doing, but it's like, you start somewhere,
Yeah.
Those
People like
episodes
the origin stuff. I mean, to be honest,
Yeah.
here we have a lot of like that's one of our most viewed episodes. Is our
Yeah.
very first one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
like,
get it.
wow, my show's so different now. I'm like,
Yeah, than what it was.
I'm like, do I take those down? I'm like, nah, that's my history. As you said, that's my Marvel origin story. So
That's so funny. I think our first one was like an hour and a half long. We just kept to your point. It was like, I think it went a little bit over the time. We're like,
yeah. My editing skills were not as good back then. Like all of that. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. I was using like a microphone that came with Rock Band, and I didn't have a microphone stand.
That's awesome.
And so the Harry Potter series was my microphone stand because it's yay big. And so then I would sit and I'd have my microphone, and that's how I started podcasting. So I think I've come a long way. But yeah, it's definitely so much.
There's
Look at
the
that.
Harry Potter tune. Speak it in the show.
That was too on point, Mel.
You can't make
You
this
just had to play John Williams for me, didn't you? Oh my gosh.
Can't make this up. Well, okay. So again, if you're just joining us, please, a couple of things. One, definitely follow DNA Today on Instagram. You can see the Instagram there. It's DNA Radio. You can go to the website. We had also posted out just a moment ago. That's dnapodcast.com. You definitely want to vote for Kira for the DNA Today's to be the number one for 3 years in a row to be the number one science and medicine. What I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the website again.
Podcastawards.com.
Perfect. Podcastawards.com. Make sure you guys go there. Make sure you vote for Kira for DNA Today to be number one in the science and medicine category. That's it. That's what you're looking for. Science and medicine, and then DNA Today. So you got to make sure she gets 3 in a row, guys. 3 in a row.
Woo. And that definitely helps with like us with, there's not a monetary prize with it, but we do get a really snazzy award. And it helps us book more sponsors. So, maybe that's something we'll talk about in overtime. Who knows? You'll just have to go on Patreon and find out.
I love it. I love it.
Thank you for that. That's actually one of the things I was going to say in overtime, guys. If you're not a member of if you're not one of our community members, on Patreon, it's down in the description box. You can just go and become one of our community members right now. It's 10, 20 or $50 and you get different things for that. But more importantly, you're going to get to see Kira in overtime as she talks about things like monetizing her podcast. right?
Yeah. That's definitely what I want to get into.
Entrepreneurs.
Money, money, money.
All right, so we'll dive into overtime with that, guys. Make sure you click that link, and there we go.
As always, remember,
remember
you deserve the good
the good
life.
life.
Say
Have a
that.
great Wednesday, you guys. Bennett.